I'm Laurie Cardoza-Moore, and this is Focus on Israel. Today, it is imperative that Christians understand the strategies to win the media war for Israel in this complex digital age. During the PJTN Media Summit, several experts explained how we must educate and ignite the next generation to join this important war for Israel and our nation. Hello, and thank you for joining me today on Focus on Israel. Like most Americans, I began to ask a lot of questions about what happened to our country following 9/11. As I read and talked to experts, the issues of radical Islam and the attacks on America and Israel became extremely personal to me. I realized that Israel is facing threats from nearly every corner, from Iran's nuclear weapons program, from terrorist groups such as Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. I also saw how much of the world comes against the Jewish state. The UN and the world continue to demand the creation of a Palestinian state, a terrorist state on Israel's doorstep. Now we see a rise of global anti-Semitism with threats from every corner, as it seems we're heading closer to the biblical prophecy of Armageddon in the Middle East. So if you're a Christian, why should you care? Many Christians believe that as the Jews rejected Jesus, then God has rejected them. This replacement theology is growing as many Christians believe they have replaced the Jews in God's prophetic plan. If you truly believe the Bible is the Word of God, then you know that when He speaks of Israel, He is speaking about the land of Israel and the Jewish people, not the church. The mission of this series and PJTN is to educate and equip you so that you can share this truth with your family and friends. On this edition of Focus on Israel, we're going to be taking you to the 2020 National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville, Tennessee. Since 2007, PJTN has been a mainstay at the NRB, and each year PJTN hosts broadcast professionals from around the world at our annual PJTN Press Briefing and Media Summit. During the three-day convention, PJTN provides content to the NRB attendees, content that they cannot get anywhere else, content that will inform their Christian viewers all over the world how to help support Israel and combat anti-Semitism. This year was exceptional and included 8 outstanding pro-Israel speakers. In part 1, you heard from 4 of our experts. Now you'll hear from the other 4. Our panel included Reverend Jeffrey Jemison, a pastor who is recognized as a leading voice of Black leadership in Ohio and throughout America. He's been involved in politics and the ministry since his teens and has degrees from Moody Bible Institute and Ashland Theological Seminary. He was appointed the first chaplain of the Ohio Democratic Party in 2006 and served to build relationships in both the Black and white communities. He expounds on Martin Luther King and Zionism and the rise of anti-Semitism in the Christian African American community. But first up is Dr. Tricia Miller, a Christian research analyst for CAMRA, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America. Dr. Miller is devoted to her passion of educating and equipping Christians to be activists for Israel and the Jewish people. Her much acclaimed book, Jews and Anti-Judaism in Esther and the Church, is considered a modern-day handbook in exposing the theological and historical errors at the root of anti-Jewish Israel narratives in today's global climate. Dr. Miller will look at how the church is influencing the unbiblical union of anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, and anti-Zionism.
It's extremely troubling that in the last few decades, under the guise of anti-Zionism, substantial parts of the organized church have succumbed once again to the millennia-old practice of delegitimizing, demonizing, and dehumanizing Jews. There's a number of ways this has happened, but I'm just going to talk about two. The first one is very overt. We've already mentioned it several times, replacement theology. Simply, replacement theology is the belief that Christians and the church have replaced Jews in Israel in the purposes of God. Therefore, there's no reason for their continued existence. So you can see how this is a foundation of anti-Semitism. Well, some Palestinian Christian theologians have adapted replacement theology to make it serve the Palestinian political agenda, which denies the right of Jews to live in their historic, their biblical homeland. And in order to do this, these Palestinian theologians promote the false claim that Palestinians are the indigenous people of the land and that Jews never lived there until a couple of hundred years ago. The second way that the church influences and encourages all three of these things, anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, is more subtle, but it's at least as dangerous. In this case, this unbiblical union is strengthened through the promotion of confusion of facts, both historic and facts on the ground, in relation to Israel's existence as a Jewish state. Unfortunately, the failure to acknowledge historic realities and facts on the ground has become some of the talking points and the education provided by some organizations that claim to be Christian, they claim to be pro-Israel, and they claim to be a force for peacemaking in the Middle East. In their effort to play a role in achieving peace between Israelis and Palestinians, they present what's going on in the Arab-Israeli conflict as an equal struggle between two equally valid national movements. As part of the attempt to make it sound like the ongoing conflict is an equal struggle between two equally valid national movements, nothing is said about how many times Israel has made tremendous concessions in the quest for peace. They're always refused. Nothing is said about what Hamas and the Palestinian Authority say in their charters, which clearly state their intent to destroy the Jewish state. Nothing is said about the ongoing incitement on the part of Palestinian Authority to murder Jews and how the PA pays people to kill Jews. The end result is that Palestinians are presented as innocent victims, and Israelis are the illegal oppressors who have no right to take action to protect their people from attempted murder. Furthermore, this so-called peacemaking that employs this technique is actually counterproductive in terms of arriving at the goals these Christian peacemakers claim they want to achieve. This is because the apparent acceptance of the distortion and omission of facts in the Palestinian narrative demonstrates a tolerant attitude towards the Palestinian Authority's demonization of Jews and their hatred of Israel and of the Jewish state. So this results in the complete unwillingness to negotiate that we witness historically and to this day among the Palestinian leadership to any attempt to broker peace. As Christian journalists and as Christian leaders, all of us here, we need to make sure that we are doing nothing to aid and abet the church in influencing and encouraging this very unbiblical union. This union that is validating the delegitimization, the demonization, the dehumanization of the Jewish people. Instead, we need to stand firmly on the facts. We need to remain grounded in the truth, which is really the only true path to peace.
Dealing with MLK and Zionism, Dr. King, I would like to say, was, of course, known as a real fighter for civil rights, and he was also a fighter for the Jews. Now, sadly, in today's world, much anti-Semitism comes from civil rights leaders and activists that have continued fighting along those lines. And even sadly to say, even in the African-American community, you know, a lot of the leaders have forgotten how much Dr. King loved the Jewish people, and they loved him. So the topic, Martin Luther King and Zionism, specifically Zionism, it's one thing to love And my sister here talked about social justice. It's love everybody, and liberalism loves everybody. It's just about love everything and everybody, even things that are wrong. But Zionism, Dr. King said his dream, of course, of a post-racial society where people would be judged by the content of their character instead of the color of their skin. As it relates to Zionism, Dr. King made this statement. He said, when people criticize Zionists, they mean Jews. You're talking anti-Semitism. When you look at the history of blacks and Jews, and especially in New York City over the last half century, it's been a very complex relationship. It's been somewhat complicated. And while it might seem as though these two communities, minority communities that were natural allies in the struggle for civil rights, because as we all know, there were Jews who marched and rabbis right alongside Dr. King during the 60s. With that great, you look at that great speech of we have a dream, I have a dream. Who was there with Dr. King? Jews, rabbis, holding hand in hand. And today, it leads to today where surveys have shown that over the last quarter century, African Americans hold anti-Semitic views at a rate far higher than the rest of the population, and it's due to the lack of communication. Add this to the Nation of Islam and its rhetoric. And then actual mosques being in black inner city communities. It's just somewhat softens the walls of separation between the two groups. How do we overcome? And I'm going to wrap this up. It's number one, we overcome this by bringing people together, bringing leaders together, people of faith leaders, for the purposes of information, discussion. That's the first thing. We've got to talk. Jewish leaders, African American leaders have to come together and talk. Secondly, I really believe we can overcome this through economic engagement. I find that as a conservative, African American males are more apt to listen to a message, the conservative message, when it has to do with building them up, giving them a sense of self-worth and freedom and economic empowerment. Thirdly, educate. Back to the basics of Scripture. Educate African Americans about their God-given responsibility to embrace Israel, God's chosen people, the nation of Israel.
I want to take you to Israel in pictures and film. I want you to see how God's sovereign hand can be seen before our eyes right here in this land. That's why PJTN is offering a special anniversary package that includes a captivating new book and award-winning DVD. Israel Rising is a unique visual story of Israel's miraculous journey from unforgiving desert to thriving nation. Thousands of years ago, the prophet Ezekiel foretold a future time in which the arid land of Israel would come alive for its people. Now this breathtaking book documents the fulfillment of this vision, as rarely seen photographs from the 1880s to the 1940s are juxtaposed with recent photos of the same locations. This book will inspire and captivate you as it illuminates Israel's foretold awakening in a new and unforgettable way. In addition, you'll receive the award-winning documentary, Israel Indivisible: The Case for the Ancient Homeland. This inspiring film examines the many political twists and turns that make Israel the world's most controversial nation. From Abraham and the Promise to the issues facing the Jewish state today, the film examines the historical, archaeological, legal, and biblical foundations for the modern state of Israel. This is a limited time offer for these two remarkable resources for just a one-time gift of $70 today. Your generous donation will help ensure that PJTN stays on the front lines and in the headlines of all the important issues facing Israel and our Jewish brethren. So please go to pjtn.org today. From studying history, it's very clear that what starts with the Jews never ends only with the Jews. We must strongly stand against any anti-Semitic trends, for if not stopped, they'll cause harm to all of us, and we'll witness the downfall of our Judeo-Christian Western culture. Today, many people say there's no longer a need for a Jewish state, that Jews around the world no longer need a place of refuge. But anyone who has heard recent statistics about the worldwide rise in anti-Semitism would never make such a claim. The reality is that neo-Nazi groups and Nazi sympathizers are increasing around the world. Surveys show that over 1 billion people in the world harbor anti-Semitic attitudes. Close to 50% believe that Jews have too much power in the business world, and 2/3 of the world's population has never heard of the Holocaust or believe the historic accounts of it are inaccurate. Don't let yourself be manipulated by evil people with a wicked agenda. When the self-serving villains are in control, good people from all religions suffer. Muslims, Christians, and all people of conscience should stand proudly and show respect for a country that gives so much to the world in so many ways. Do your part, do your research, and do what you can to make a difference. Because what happens in Israel does affect us all. This is not just a Jewish or just an Israeli problem. This is a problem for all humanity, for each and every one of us who believe in freedom and human rights. Learn more about what you can do at pjtn.org. Our next two speakers include Dexter Van Zyl and Rabbi Jonathan Hausman. Dexter Van Zyl currently serves as a media analyst for Camera and is undoubtedly one of the world's most knowledgeable analysts on Christian anti-Israelism and anti-Semitism. His studied commentary has been lauded in national and international publications, such as the Boston Globe, the Jerusalem Post, and the Allgemeiner. He'll be exposing how Christian leaders are using their influence to promote anti-Semitism. Rabbi Jonathan Hausman lectures nationally and internationally. He is also busy briefing legislators on national security and foreign policy issues regarding Israel, Jewish continuity, and the existential dangers in world Jewry. He serves in spiritual leadership at Ahavat Torah Congregation in Stoughton, Massachusetts. He will discuss the unification of Jews and Christians. Is it historic? Is it biblical?
For approximately 60 years after the Nazis and their helpers killed 2/3 of the Jews living in Europe and started a war that killed upwards of 60 million people, anti-Semitism was a discredited ideology, particularly in the United States. Unfortunately, those days are over. Now anybody with a web camera can connect with thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of fans on the internet, and they can also solicit donations from their supporters. And sadly enough, two of the worst examples of this phenomenon are Christians. One example is a Christian news organization called True News, led by Rick Wiles. And I first ran into True News at the 2018 Christ at the Checkpoint Conference in Bethlehem, an anti-Israel event organized by Palestinian Christians, most of them affiliated with Bethlehem Bible College. Conference organizers gave True News the run of the place, and during the conference, Wiles told his viewers that Israeli Jewish rabbis are just like Judas looking for a political savior who will rule a political kingdom on earth, a super race that will dominate the planet. That's really what Zionism is all about. And he also declared that if Jesus himself walked the streets of Jerusalem again, they would release Barabbas and they would crucify Jesus. Nothing has changed. And the thing is that YouTube, they basically discredited themselves and they were kicked off of YouTube. But that's only going to add to the organization's credibility amongst its hardcore followers. For example, one person who has come to the defense of True News is a Catholic anti-Semite by the name of E. Michael Jones. And like Rick Wiles, he's been able to use internet technology to broadcast his hate to a large number of disaffected young men here in the United States. And one of the things that E. Michael Jones does is he goes around telling people that the Jews are essentially the source of every problem in the world. And the thing is that if you're a young, disaffected young man who's had a tough time making his way into the world, kind of like, the men who came back from World War I in Germany, well, that's a pretty good story to buy into. Now, the thing is that Bishop Kevin Rhodes, who serves the diocese where Jones lives and worships, has come out against Jones's rants in a statement that was issued last week. But the thing is that even E. Michael Jones is going to say, look, they got to him too, because anytime the Jewish community or the pro-Israel community is successful in basically challenging this anti-Semitism in an administrative way or something like that, they'll say, look, the Jews control everything. It grieves me to say this, but so-called Christian peacemakers have been the primary facilitators and enablers of anti-Semitism in the West and have been for the past few decades. What happens is that they affirm the Palestinian vendetta narrative against Israel. Organizations such as the World Council of Churches, Churches for Middle East Peace, and those are the two people that I've been writing about most recently, they affirm basically this grievance and vendetta narrative put forth by Palestinian elites and translate it and soften it for Western ears. And they sand off explicit anti-Semitism but they leave the overall grievance and vendetta narrative intact. And they promote self-determination for the Palestinians, whose elites have denied the Jewish right to self-determination time and time again. And that's really one of the things that is most troublesome. So why am I talking about the World Council of Churches and Churches for Middle East Peace in the same breath as Rick Wiles and E. Michael Jones? Because these groups prepared the way for these haters. Both Wiles and Jones lifted their talking points about Israel from the progressive pro-Palestinian Christian peace movement. And the thing is that this is really the question that we have to present to followers of Jesus. Are you going to align your suffering with that of Christ, or are you going to align or combine your rage with the mob that put Christ on the cross? And the thing is that you can't claim to support human rights when you align your activism with the interest of a political movement that demands the right of self-determination while denying it to the Jewish people.
Yeah, my colleagues in the pulpit have abdicated a lot of their responsibilities. They have. For the reasons, I don't know. You know, you do what I do, and if you're in the pulpit, you have to discuss issues that matter. I only have one issue. I'm a one-issue guy. The safety and security of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. I don't care about anything else. I don't care who I embarrass. I don't care who I offend. So what ends up happening when I go out on my speaking junkets, which are few and far between these days, the question becomes in my pulpit, you know, Rabbi, you're going to, like the other day, all right, proclaiming justice to the nation. Oh, Rabbi, we remember Glory Cardozo-Moore coming up to the synagogue. You know, is it really kosher to accept their support? That's really what it boils down to. And it causes lots of Jews to scratch their head, well, in my case, scratch my scalp, because you have this growing phenomenon of Christian support, evangelical Christian support, that has many American Jews perplexed. And they ask questions. And what's the question that's asked? Is this subterfuge? Is there something else behind this? Is there a missionary impulse? And after 20 years of doing this, you know, listen, I understand where a lot of these Jews are coming from. But fact of the matter is, here's where it comes from. These people, including my rabbinic colleagues, a majority of my rabbinic colleagues are, and Dr. Boston and I have spoken about this too, they are so divorced from Jewish tradition, and they are so divorced from Jewish practice. They're divorced from a grand knowledge of Jewish history, facility with Jewish texts, that they have no historical context when it comes to this kind of conversation. Completely. What they are informed with is liberal political sensibilities. And that has absolutely nothing to do with the pulpit. If you're a rabbi, your job is to make sure that Jews understand that being Jewish is the most grateful gift that God can give you. And if that's the case, you cannot marginalize Christian Zionists, because Lori, that's what you are, and that's what you are. But concomitantly, you have to know who sits across the table. If you preach acceptance of revisionist Palestinian narrative that denies Jewish historical claims, why are you sitting with that person? It makes no sense. Absolutely makes no sense. And that goes whether you're sitting in a synagogue or whether you're sitting here at the NRB. You have to do your homework. If you find people who accept the validity of Jewish belief and Jewish practice and Jewish history, who understand, as I teach my congregants, to read the Bible critically, and if you as a Christian read your Bible critically, I think you'll find Jewish resonance in what you read in the New Testament, because it's all there, including bold and bald statements that God's covenant with the Jewish people is irrevocable and has never been broken and can never be broken.
That's our show for today, and I want you to know we appreciate hearing from you. Please send your comments and questions to comments@pjtn.org. The time to take a stand is now. Be a leader in your community and in your church. One person can make a difference. Get involved with and support pro-Israel organizations such as PJTN. Call your senators, congressmen, the White House. Let your elected leaders hear from you. Visit our website to learn more. Sign up to receive free action alerts and order our films to share with family and friends. Please encourage everyone you know to tune in and become informed. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren and all Israel. We'll see you next time on Focus on Israel.
To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, P.O. Box 682711, Franklin, Tennessee 37068. You can also support PJTN online. Visit pjtn.org or call 1-877-873-9020.
Anti-Semitism has reached epic proportions, and Israel is now surrounded by nations who seek its destruction. For Israel to lose just one battle would mean losing everything. As Christians, it is our biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and Israel. PJTN needs your help to reach more Christians with this urgent message. Please visit our website to become a member today and order our award-winning documentaries. You must decide that you won't be silent. Sign up now at pjtn.org. God bless you, and thank you for your support and prayers.